Hello, Sean.
What's up? How are you, Max?
Good, good. So we invited you to ask a couple questions, or a lot of questions actually. The thing is, Russian community, it has a lot of prejudice and a lot of interesting thoughts about African Americans and protests and a lot of events going on. So I decided to invite you and to ask you a lot of questions actually, yeah. So tell me more about yourself probably. We'll think more.
Yeah. Well,
did you grow up in US probably? You
oh
did?
yeah, I grew up in US. In fact, I'm actually from Texas.
Okay,
So
okay.
I'm from Texas.
Did you graduate from school?
Yeah,
Did you
yeah,
grow
I
up
got-
in a
yeah,
nice district?
I grew up in a kind of a working class, part of Texas. So of Houston, Texas. So then I moved to Washington about 5 years ago. No, like 6 years ago now. Yeah. So about 6 years ago. And just started my life there. But yeah, I grew up, went to school, Texas, and then came up here. So, what I do now, I'm a union electrician. So, and besides that, kind of involved, best way I can in the whole more social justice strata, particularly.
Let's jump into more poverty level people. I will tell you probably with my personal story. When I came over to US, I was all like, for me, Americans were Americans. I didn't care if they're African Americans or not, And when I came over, I started working in Seattle in simple companies, and I noticed there are not so many African Americans around me. And but when I was walking in downtown, I've noticed that a lot of homeless people are African Americans, and a lot of beggars are African Americans, and a lot of, I don't know, outside people, and when I was receiving police reports, crimes, this person was African American, this person was African American, I get these reports. So I developed in myself this prejudice against African Americans. When I came over here, I was thinking, maybe they are like this, maybe they just can't live in the US. I was young, I was 20 years old, and I was forming it in myself. And I hear this opinion a lot in Russian internet. If there is something happens when the African American is a criminal, they're like, yep, they're like this, And the worst case is when person got a job somewhere at Microsoft or Google, and he came over from Russia and he works here as a software engineer, making a good chunk of money, buying a nice house, and he sees this African American being poor, and he's like, hey, I came myself without anything here. And these guys, they had already a citizenship, they have a social security number, they have all the benefits, and for example, my companies need to hire someone African American, and I'm so probably there is something wrong with this African Americans, and there is something right with who wants to be successful in America, they can be successful. That's what they meant. Of course, I have changed myself. I'm not like this anymore, no worries. I grew up from that. What you would say to those people who thinks that, who says that? How would you respond to them?
It's a level of ignorance from the lack of knowledge of the system. Because, for example, your example actually describes two different situations.
Yep.
One, the poverty. Reason why African Americans can be on average more impoverished is because there's a lack of economic mobility.
What do you mean by that?
Economic mobility. What I mean by that is opportunities and structures for people who grow up in impoverished situations to get an education and pick up a career that can, whether pay well and they can do well for themselves. Economic mobility. So they they go on from being really poor to making good money, making a good living, enough for their families and stuff like that. And I can explain both. And the second end, was what you were saying. For example, your situation,
Yep. But it's the same situation.
you're a foreigner, you
Yeah.
came over here.
Yeah.
That's also capitalism right there. Because, and I can explain both sides, but in fairly decent detail, at least as I can. But we'll go back to economic mobility and African Americans first.
Sure.
Okay, so, because even then, that breaks down into different sectors. In the past, well, to give you some historical context, for years there's been there's lack of, there's a segregation period and stuff like that. How the U.S. government and U.S. and society, American society, they wanted to exclude. They openly excluded African Americans from participating, whether it's in the economy or finding work and stuff like that. So such things, what that meant was we did things on our own. So if we did work, we brought our own money back inside. We established our own like grocery stores or gas stations or taxi cabs or whatever, whatever everything, we had to do it within ourselves, within our own community. Because of segregation, we couldn't, be in the same places or generally, participate in the same stuff as white people, right? So even in places, for example, Washington, there's the Northwest region in general, while it didn't have like openly Jim Crow laws like in the South, which where I'm from, there was that culture and implicit biases and structures to essentially have the same effect. Fun fact, in the state of Oregon, which for your other viewers that don't, it's just south of us, it's the next state, neighbor state, black people were not allowed to own property in the state of Oregon until 1926. It was actually in their state constitution.
That was impressive.
And they voted to remove that language from their constitution maybe only about 20 years ago.
Really?
Think about 2002, 2003.
So
you can fact check me on that.
Okay. Yeah, there will be a good description here. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The Pacific Northwest, which is where we live, was initially established to be a white man's utopia. That was their idea, and that was one reason why they pushed for manifest destiny and imperialism, pushing genocide of the indigenous societies here who are already here, and to get to the land and to take in. So, but yeah, so there's that. But anyways, running back, economic mobility. Yeah. There's lacks of structures, lack of opportunities. What the first thing they did was there's you attack the schools. So how you attack a school? You defund, which defund's a very popular term used nowadays, particularly for police.
Yep.
Maybe that's another question, whatever. But you defund schools, and because when you defund schools, you take away programs because they don't have the money to offer everything, right? So you defund schools, you defund opportunities, you defund educating kids with skills. Those skills, they can immediately go out after high school and work somewhere.
Yep.
That's how we have the middle class, particularly because of unions and trades. People who were working class people, they could take a trade, like a trade class or a trade course, like a pre-trade course in school. You could in high school, and you graduate high school, and then you can walk right in to a union, and then you start working and start developing, and with your trade, and you put in and you made good money because the unions had good wages and bargaining and benefits and stuff like that collective bargaining and unions fought for. You now could just walk into the union, you work, and you put a stock career, and you have enough money now because you were poor, but now you have enough money to your family may have a good life, and you're not rich, but you're not poor. And that's where the middle class was established. Stuff like unions and stuff like that. So people were big unions from the time. Like I'm part of the IBEW. That's the electricians union. Okay, so
yep.
There's guys like United Steel Workers or Mine Workers or United Auto Workers, particularly in the 40s and 50s. Stuff like that. That's when the middle class was really established. And for African Americans, it's no different because there was still racism in unions, but it wasn't nearly as much in unions than the rest of society, because the idea of union solidarity amongst working class, the ideals, historically, meant that unions were more willing to give African Americans opportunity, stuff like that. So, but in those communities now, you take those programs away, and then they have poor education. They don't have much money. You can't get the best resources for teaching. You can't get the best teachers or books or whatnot. And because of that, it makes it harder for people to get a good education in college, because also they're impoverished. A lot of families, we have a broken higher education system in terms of funding. If a family who's living working class, I don't care what race you are, you probably can't afford to put your kid through college to pay the necessary. So then that's why people, if they can, they get student loans to pay for their schooling. And that's a whole nother issue, and that's a really big problem in the U.S. is what's happening right now. So that's the economic mobility. You're just taking away avenues for people to develop and go up a ladder to establish those careers. Now the other end, with, for example, bringing foreigners into the U.S. is particularly very popular in the software, computer, stuff like industry. That's really just that's straight capitalism. It is just such pure capitalism right there. There's this fun thing. You can also fact check me on this. It's called the H-1B visa. You're laughing. You know exactly where I'm going with this. If you're a part of the if you're part of the class who that sort of wealthy class of people who make those decisions, work for those big giant corporations and stuff like that. You have one person who's an American. They went to school, got a college degree and whatever, and they got their education, blah 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 blah. And there's this person who comes from a different country. They're also college educated in their country, and both people would be very competent at what they do. They'll probably do the job well, whatever.
Yep.
But a company can sponsor you on this guy on an H-1B visa and pay him only this much. The American citizen, born and raised American, so they would be hired, but they would command naturally a larger salary. Just because, perhaps. Yeah, compared to, you can. There's some companies can do it, can get away with that.
Okay.
It depends. That's not uniform. Every corporation is different. So, but that was the idea. You can outsource and get more people and bring them in because they're cheaper.
So H-1B get less money, right? Less salary then.
If you import someone from overseas and you get the visa, in theory, the theory is you can get them for cheaper. Not
Can't?
saying you can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they can get them for cheap. They only have to pay them X amount.
Yeah.
In the American, they have to pay them X amount, which is higher.
Yeah.
So they save money.
X plus Y.
Yeah.
Right.
They save them. They save money by just hiring this guy and sponsoring him the visa process.
I'll add one more aspect to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can break the rights more.
Yep.
If he's rightless person here, he's here on the visa. He's not going to go and complain something. He's very afraid of losing job. He's lawless. Here, if he knows if he'll do one wrong thing, he'll be kicked out back to his country.
Yep.
That's why they work like slaves. They can work 16 hours, 14 hours, 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
They can do all this hard stuff, and nobody will care about them. And he's afraid to go and complain somewhere. That's why they prefer hiring. I actually say myself to that it's easier to be an immigrant here than to be an American, because education, you can get there in Kazakhstan. You can get bachelor for free, mostly, or it will be very cheap,
Mm-hmm.
and it's good, high quality education. You are good at math and you have a very good, strong foundation, whatever your degree is. Yeah, and when you come over here, you don't have any loans, you don't have any standards. You're ready to live for some time in some dorm, and people want to hire you because what you said. Because when Indian or Kazakh or Russian, he's getting like 4,000 per month, he's like, wow, that's just crazy money. When American software engineers is offered for $4,000 a month, they're like, what is this? This is not a salary, you know?
Yep, you're right. And there's no pressure to pay them more like pay an American. Because let's say an American just graduated, they might have student loan debt. You know, all these people who graduate, they're moving in the world. It's like, hey, I need to be paid more because I went through all this. I have this much student debt from my schooling and this, that, and the other. So in general, there's that demand to be paid more, and there's none of that. So they have full control when they import people to the U.S. and devalues. So there's that.
Giving your advice, probably is better to vote for Trump because he's limiting this H-1B visas, right?
Oh God, no. Maybe you guys for another question, but in general, just because I don't like Donald Trump at all.
Why I'm not surprised. And I was shocked when several years ago I found out that some people in America, they can't read, you know, they cannot solve simple equations, you know. I remember my friend in college, she was solving some stuff that in Kazakhstan, person is 9 years old and he's solving these equations. And here my friend who is like 30 years old cannot solve it, you know, she's like struggling with it, she cannot understand it, she cannot catch it, you know. Mm-hmm. I was shocked with that. So probably this should be taken into consideration, that it's people don't understand how lowly educated person can be, you know, like if you can't count, for example, or if you can't read, you're like your job is limited very much. What do you think about that?
I understand exactly what you're saying. Like your countries, like Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, those post-Soviet, in the post-Soviet world, your education, the framework goes back to how it was in the Soviet Union. That's when it was established. So your framework of how you guys handle your education is still probably, you know, I'm sure there's some differences now, but the framework still comes back from the Soviet. That's why there's such a quality of education. In the U.S., it's different because we don't necessarily educate children, in my view, to really give good quality education and every chance and blah blah blah. Despite, you know, what people may say, it's more about just developing people to be good workers. People, you know, good workers who
good slaves.
What's it?
Good slaves.
Exactly. You get up, you do your 9 to 5. You know,
then you can go home, smoke weed, don't think about it, drink alcohol, and then go back to work. You don't need to read or educate yourself like that.
You know, you do as you're told. You know, you make your pittance, you make your crumbs, and then, you know, and you do that for, you know, 40 years, then you retire. If you're lucky to be in a certain position, you have a pension, and you make your little Social Security, which is probably not going to exist anymore, and then you die.
So I want to tell you a story about one of my not friends, just a couch surfer, a random guy showing up at my place when we had a beer, and he told me the story that slavery was not abolished, you know, in the U.S. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was abolished. Lincoln won war for it, you know. And he was like, slavery just moved to prisons, you know. Now it's in jails and prisons, and they're just prisons, not jails. And people still working for American economy. People still, there are private prisons, there are different kind of prisons, and people are still working there, you know, and for free generally, or just for like $20 a month or some silly salaries, you know. So what do you think about this? So do you think it's a good part of economy? I don't have research on my hands, so probably.
He's absolutely right. In terms of the U.S. Constitution, he is referring to the 13th Amendment. In terms of the U.S. Constitution, as far as it's concerned, slavery is still perfectly legal if, as I quote, there's an exception, convicted of a crime.
Okay, okay.
Yes. So as far as the U.S. Constitution is concerned, slavery is 100% legal if you're convicted of a crime. So, and that's how it works. Slavery just it just re it just modernized itself. It just renamed itself. You know, slavery is bad. We shouldn't own slaves and blah 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 blah. Okay, well just find someone, catch them for some really petty crime or whatever, and then just put them in trial in a really biased legal system. There you go. You got yourself another slave.
And do you think there is a plan for we should arrest this amount of people to keep our economy going or our prison going? I've read about some judges who are like giving more harsher convictions to people so they could, the private corporations, private prisons, they were paying this judge to arrest and put in prison more people. Yeah. Do you think this is what's going on?
Oh, absolutely. I know exactly what judge you're referring to, stuff like that, and he just got caught.
Yeah, yes,
so,
that's what I meant, yeah.
And that's another thing. People think every time we hear something about from some stuff like this or almost anything, we just found out who got caught because that's why we're hearing about it. So we wouldn't be hearing about the ones that are still going on if they haven't been caught yet. Logic, right? But no, yes, the economy is definitely, prisoners are a really important part of the U.S. economy. That's essentially free labor. We have like the most inmates of any single country on earth, I think. Even more so than like China. They have like four times the population. We have the most inmates. And every one of them is so important. They use prisoners for whether firefighters, making clothes, making license plates that we put in our cars, just almost a lot of things that they do, and we pay them essentially nothing. So they're a very important part, and because of that, we need that steady flow of inmates. We have a prison system and legal system. It's not about rehabilitating prisoners, teaching them skills for them to come out and try to be good citizens, or well, I don't say that good citizens, but more like for them to have good lives and set themselves up for better futures. It's more about punishment. We punish them and we don't teach them as much, and because of that we have a high recidivism rate, so people who commit more crimes and get back into it. Because if you go come out with a set of skills, now you're back out in society, you need a place to live, you need a place to work, but you don't have this much skills to find work or whatever. What are you going to do? You're going to go back to what you know. So that's how. And there's this thing called the prison to pipeline. There's a school to prison pipeline. You start when they're young. Here's what I mean. You have a neighborhood, and African Americans are hit the most, and you don't have these opportunities for like whether it's trade learning or just for proper education. They come from poor areas, so they can't afford school. So a lot of kids, they get into like certain types of crime where it pays well, or whether it's like drug dealing or whatever, it pays well and they can support themselves and their families, but then they get caught. So because of those lack of opportunities, they start to commit more crime, they get caught and they go to prison. So it feeds the cycle like that. So you feed the economy by having this free labor, but also you can attack certain communities and reduce their economic strength. The one reason why the civil rights movement was so successful, especially during segregation, was because of segregation, economically, African Americans had to do everything within themselves. We established our own markets, established our own economies. So we all had a lot of money. We were able to financially support the movement. That's the key. For example, the bus boycott. You know how black people got around during the bus boycott? We had taxi cabs. We had our own taxi cab companies, and they would ride around taxi cabs. We would support the freedom riders. We would pay for so many things. So because we had the economic power to sustain the movement, that's why it was so successful in the end. Because the powers that be could not. They thought, we'll just fold. but we didn't because we had economic power. Also, we had the severe threat of violence in the background as well.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts about that. Yeah.
So, no, that's how it works. So, with the prison pipeline, it's a high recidivism rate. It's very important to the economy, and that's why we have such petty crime. We throw people in for anything.
I wanted
And
to
you also
notice-
disenfranchise people. They can't vote. They can't own guns. So now, that's the original gun control
Yeah.
that people don't talk about.
Yep. I wanted to notice that when I came over here, I was looking for a job here, and I was going to simplest place, like silliest place where you cannot steal or break anything, like McDonald's, Subway, any fast food places, and everywhere on job applications you have to say that you didn't have any crimes for 7 years. And when I was finally working in fast food, they were like just throwing away anyone who is having like any convictions at all, like not even 7 years. If person has conviction, that's it. He shouldn't be hired at all, like ever.
There's such a bias for
Yeah.
people
It's not
with
a
criminal
bias.
history.
I think it's I've heard that there is a fear. If you hired someone with a conviction and then he made a crime, it's you who are to blame, not him, because you've seen that he already had some convictions. Like that's a system actually creating it. System actually trying to make not to hire person who just shoplifted a gum in the store.
There's a heavy base in religion, particularly pure. It's like a puritanical sort of view on things.
How about forgiveness in Christianity? I thought Christians should be forgiving, and if you ask for forgiveness from God, that's it. You're free. You're forgiven.
Oh no! Some people read a different Bible.
Yeah.
Thomas Sankara, former leader of Burkina Faso, said, "A rich man, the poor man. The Bible can't equally serve a rich man, a poor man."
There is a representation that it's very hard to live in this underprivileged district.
Okay.
There is a lot of shootings going on,
Okay.
a lot of harassment, rapes, and
Okay.
is it for me? When I came over to New York, they were like, "Hey, there are these districts, you don't go there at all," And what about you? Can you go there? Can you live there? Do you feel comfortable living there, or it's hard for everyone to live there?
Yeah, I
in
mean,
these
like,
districts?
I feel comfortable there. I grew up in probably one of those areas in
Wow.
Houston, Texas. So,
So
sure,
it's-
there could be some dangers, but I feel 100% comfortable living there. There's there's people struggling, and because of the struggle, and because they struggle, there could be risk for danger because people are trying to survive. So there's that. But think of it like this: if people have opportunities, like legitimate opportunities to develop and learn, educate, and develop stable working careers, they're just not going to participate in such crime and stuff like that.
Yep.
It's just natural. If you look at some of probably a list of top 10 most crime areas, you take that same list and look up the top 10 most economically underserved areas, cities or whatever. A lot of them are going to be the same. There you
Yep.
go.
Yeah.
So, but no, it's hard for everyone because everyone's trying to survive. But I wouldn't say it's something. I wouldn't say it's like, oh my God, people can't. It's so dangerous. It's inhabitable. Like, I think that's just an overreaction. So, it's also probably meant to just put people in a bad light. So, I think it's over
Direction.
yes, overstressed.
Coming back to our underprivileged districts, how bad is education there? Just maybe more examples, like people, for example, you went to school there, or high school, middle school, elementary school. How many people were
I did not go to high school there. Actually, I went to I went to school in my district, but I moved into a middle class area.
I've heard a lot of people not even finishing their school. They don't graduate from
Like high
middle
school,
school,
high
yeah,
school dropout and stuff like that.
or
Yeah.
middle school dropouts. Is it possible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It can
yeah.
be. It can be. I'm not sure about middle school. I'm not sure about that. I don't
Okay,
think that's
okay.
really common. But high school, yeah, it happens. People drop out.
And do
You
you
know-
think it's having a deep influence on their life afterwards?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it
'Cause,
changing their
Yeah,
lives?
because if you don't have a high school diploma at a minimum, that severely impacts you on what you can get or how you can develop. If you don't get a GED
Okay. Okay.
later on down the road.
Okay.
So,
okay.
yeah, it's definitely a problem. But people live individual lives, and maybe they're in situations where going to school is not tenable anymore. There's many instances of students who, they rely, their families rely on them actually working full time. They can't go to work full time and go to school.
Yeah.
That sort of situations, or they live in toxic environments where they can't do their best in school. So it's just everyone's, there's so many cases and different things like that, which again in the US we have a severe lack of access to infrastructure to assist people's, and in the United States it's very individualistic.
Yep.
So it's just about you. There isn't many safety nets like that. So there's a big push in the United States from among communities, more liberal people and liberal sort of groups, to establish more safety nets to help the general populace.
Yep. Yep.
Essentially, they brand it democratic socialism. It's really social democracy. It's really capitalism with safety nets, but that's
what Bernie is about.
Yeah, Bernie. But yeah.
Then we can jump on the topic of Black Panthers and what that's where they came for, like afterwards. First of all, they were organized as a people with arms who can protect their own people, and that was very good idea, and they were get popular with that. But then there was laws were changed, especially in Berkeley, so they cannot walk with guns. Actually, they cannot walk with even concealed guns. As I remember, the laws limited all their activity, as I remember, and there was a lot of course, murders and arrests, murders during arrest. Yeah. You wanted to say something, or?
Oh no.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going there. That this, I think, in my opinion, Black Panthers started breaking when they started doing charity stuff. They started opening their own schools. They started opening their small hospitals or like first aid, and they were doing that, and people it's free, not restaurants, free canteens. I don't know. People go there and eat.
Food banks.
Yeah, but their own, like Black Panther food banks, probably. Yeah, and schools for schools especially. Yeah.
Yeah, like soup kitchens and cafeterias for like children.
Yeah, and they're all for free. Yeah.
Breakfast programs. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's where they started breaking apart. They actually became a part of this capitalistic system that time, and that time from all devotees who wanted to be a Black Panthers and fight for freedom, fight for emancipation, or for stop having all this racist crap in the system. They stopped being that, and they started doing something where a lot of people started coming over to them, and they didn't want to work. They didn't want to contribute to the society. They just wanted some free stuff from Black Panthers, and that's where the movement has stopped working. It stopped opposing the system. It started helping the system. So these people who were fed for free, for help for free, they were like, oh, then capitalism is not that bad. Then system is not that bad. And they were actually helping the system instead of opposing it. What do you think about this thought? This is my personal thought.
I do not agree.
Okay, tell me more about that.
A lot of what you just said.
Okay.
First of all, we must understand the context here. The Black Panthers started the Black Panthers, as you mentioned. It was, they saw a need in their communities. They saw a need for people to, assist their neighbors, because they lived in the same areas, as these people they're serving. They saw a need to help, with like free breakfast for children and stuff like that, food banks and clinics, like. In general principle, in general principle, there is absolutely nothing wrong with establishing these structures to help feed people and to help provide medical care and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That should be celebrated. That is, in fact, what society as a whole we should be doing.
Yep,
They saw a problem and they went after it to address it. In fact, the fact that they took charge to try to help the next generation of like these children who are like next generation citizens, because they're going to be adults too. It should be applauded, and that's what we should be doing, especially from a revolutionary standpoint. Because in general, things may not develop fast enough that you really like that you set the groundwork, but things might not develop fast enough where you actually see the benefit of it. It's actually people like a generation or two after you're dead and gone, where things really hit a switch.
Yep.
But it was the groundwork that in the efforts you made and the structures and stuff like that you built those efforts, and they get built on and built on and built on until there's that moment, that spark that can cause anything. But with Black Panthers specifically, they fell apart because the U.S. government specifically targeted them.
Yeah, like
Specifically.
J. Edgar said something like the
J. Edgar
biggest
Hoover,
enemy.
former
Yeah.
FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, former director at FBI, literally made it his goal to destroy the Black Panthers.
Yep.
Whether it's Huey Newton, Bobby Hutton, Fred Hampton, of course, Mark Clark, all those guys, and then you're throwing different people in jail, Herman Bell, in prison and stuff like that. So there's that. And also, you mentioned about how carrying guns and stuff like that. It wasn't just the city of Berkeley; it was the state of California.
Oh, okay.
I'll give a really quick story on that. When it comes to gun control in the U.S., there's two states in particular that have some of the harshest gun laws in the country: New York, California.
Where the Black Panthers were the strongest.
Yes, they're based in Oakland. They established there. California in particular, one can say their whole gun control sort of what started their whole push for gun control and eventually led to what it is today in California was this piece of legislation called the Mulford Act in 1967, I want to say. Yeah, 67. So the Mulford Act, it happened because the Black Panthers open carried their rifles onto the California State Capitol in Sacramento. And here's the thing. One thing, especially particularly in the gun culture, white Americans do not like when Black Americans are organized and armed historically. It's never good. Because there's a fear that perhaps, and it's subtle. It might not from an individual perspective, but as a group, it's like they have this fear that we might do to them what they did to us. Just that general fear.
Go ahead.
But so because of that, it really made them nervous to see a bunch of Black people organized and driven, open carrying their rifles, their AK-47s, and stuff like that in the state capitol. So as a result, the NRA, big gun group in the U.S., lobby group for gun rights and stuff like that, even the NRA was like, we can't have this, blah, 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 which is ironic because for a gun rights group, they're freaking out. It's like, oh, well, we can't have this. NRA, they hardly ever fight for Black people, and it's for a reason. Gun rights for everyone, as long as you're white. Anyways, but then at the time, the governor of California at the time was former U.S. President Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
So after California legislature passed the act, he signed it into law. So that law banned open carry in the state of
Yep.
California.
That bastard did a lot of bad things to
Yeah,
us too.
the proud of Ronald Reagan. But then again, by today's standards, he might be a Democrat politically. So that's just
Yep.
how things have how
Yeah,
right
yeah,
wing
it's
the
switched
United States.
actually, yeah.
Well, that's just how right wing the U.S. has moved.
From Democrats to Republicans.
Well, just in general, the politics in
Yeah.
America are extremely right wing, and it has moved right wing. So guys like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, they might be Democrats today, just because their politics, what they voted on and stuff like that, what they wanted to do, is more in line with Democrats. Richard Nixon's he signed into law would eventually establish the Environmental Protection Agency, a Republican. The environment.
Yeah. It was different time.
Different time.
Yep,
But
yep.
yeah.
Wrapping up Black Panther's topic, do you think they have good influence on the society? Do they still have some influence now? Do you hear some thoughts? Did they inject something in society that's still echoing in Black community? Or do you think they're just gone? They were just like appearing and gone?
There is some echoes and some, but a lot of it is, I would say, lost. I do think the Black community, we need to study the because the Black Panthers they were Marxist Leninist Maoists, so they followed and read in the teachings of Mao and how and his take on dialectical materialism and that sort of ideological thought.
Yep.
So I think we do need to refresh and see what the Black Panthers did. Black Panthers wanted to establish dual power. They wanted to establish structures where the Black community, we did not need the overall larger American society to survive and persist. Because, for example, I bring up another Thomas Sankara quote. He said, "He who feeds you controls you," and it's absolutely true.
Okay.
Absolutely true. So it was about establishing our own separate independent structures. And once we do that, we can establish the foundation and the roots and the groundwork to encourage more Black thought about Black liberation and ways to go about that and how we can push forward, because we have our own structures that are not dependent on the larger society, which has been proven to not look out for our best interests. In fact, cast us aside.
Talking about system, what do you think about African Americans being put in the art too much, Like, for example, there is some kind of tolerance. Did you hear about this news about Oscar, that there should be the Oscar is now given to African American. It should be at least one Oscar should be given to African American.
Like the Oscar awards?
Yeah. From next year, I think. Or
Okay.
I'll give more examples. For example, Will Smith was rejected recently for a role because he wasn't Black enough. His blackness was different level, Or for example, Zoe Saldana, the actress, she was.
Yep, heard of her.
Yeah, she was apologizing a few years ago that she was playing Nina Simone.
Yep.
But because she's not Black enough, she says.
Well,
and I'll go more into it, and there is some very from European perspective, it looks very weird, For example, if for example Russian Tsar would be played by Chinese, people will be laughing, what the heck? Why he's Asian? He should be white, And in Greek mythology, gods or even real people like Achilles, he was playing by African American. And for us, or for Russians mostly, Russian post-Soviet people, it looks like crazy. What happened with them? Why they're apologizing for some silly stuff? Why they're they're putting African Americans in every movie, you know, like for example, when I watch movies in 60s, I barely see African American there. When I watch movie now, there is always either a comical character or some African American guy, and it's like pushy, you know, and it's actually pushing people back, you know, like they're like, why these African Americans are like given so many privileges and so pressured, you know. So what do you think about that?
I just think those points are based on ignorance, and ignorance because of lack of historical context. Here's what I'll try to explain. I'll explain a couple of those situations first.
Okay. Go
Then I'll go into the larger
Okay.
explanation. For example, Zoe Saldana and Nina Simone, right?
Yep.
Reason why she apologized is because, and she should have, because she should have rejected the role. I'll explain why.
Okay. Tell me why.
Nina Simone was a very good singer, very famous, and this kind of delves to a different topic. It's called colorism. Okay, and I'll explain that briefly as I can. Zoe Saldana is a black woman, but she's a lighter-skinned black woman. She has background from Hispanic, Latino era. So I think she's also Puerto Rican. I think so. But yeah, she's a black woman, but she's like a light-skinned black woman. Nina Simone was a dark-skinned black woman from the South, I think.
Okay.
And because of that, Zoe Saldana's experiences were entirely different from what Nina Simone was, being a dark-skinned woman and coming from there, and then having that career and stuff.
But good actor is playing anyone he wants, you know. Some German can play Russians, even he didn't grow up in Russia. Okay.
As you mentioned your example, if Russians are, then why is there a Chinese man playing this one?
Yes, but this looks totally different for us.
But if you have, why do you have a light-skinned black one like this?
Also, we will not ask for apology. We will just say this is a fail of producer, you know, of the director of the movie. He didn't know the context. We will just say that people don't have to apologize for.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
Okay,
because at the end of the day, she should never taken that role.
Okay,
there is quite in Hollywood. That's that entertainment industry. It's called colorism. Okay.
Okay.
And colorism stems from racism. Okay. Historically, light-skinned black people have more privileges than dark-skinned black people. Why? Because historically, that means if you're a lighter-skinned black person, that means you have a closer, as we call it, proximity to whiteness. But that means also, in simple terms, you most likely have a white ancestor or someone very close to you, whether it's your parent or your grandparent.
Probably
they're a white person.
Most likely a rapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially back in slavery, that most likely a rapist, whatever, right? Or just in general, you have light skin and darker skinned black people. So if the origin of that, you send that all the way back to like when slavery, chattel slavery was going on. What that meant was he had a light skinned black person because probably the slave master raped one of his slaves or whatever.
Yes.
That light-skinned black person child, they were still born into slavery. They were still born a slave, but they were given favor. They were given favor amongst other black people. So let's say they could work. In fact, there's a term in the black community. It's called a house. A house.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yes. That's where it goes back.
Yep.
We say that as a bad term as in someone who is they live in such a fashion to serve or they don't
really
accepted,
work.
Accepted by, they live in a fashion or they act in a certain way to try to be accepted by white people. Because the term a house person, like a house slave, if they're a light-skinned black person, they're most likely had a white ancestor so they could work in the house. Because they're most likely close related. They're related to the slave master or slave master's family. So still born a slave. So that's what comes out. Because of that, historically, light-skinned black people were found favor. Dark-skinned black people, just black people, they were slaves working outside, whatever. So now there's a conflict because the slaves out there, they were treated a certain, they were obviously treated, and they suffered the full brutality of their situation, and they noticed other light-skinned black people who didn't go through those same experiences.
Okay.
Sure, they weren't free; they were still slaves, but they weren't beaten or they weren't.
They were
beaten
treated
or
softly. Yeah.
They were treated. They were treated with favor, and they worked in the house, and they just did stuff like that. So that's where it really originally all the way comes from. It's called colorism now. It's a subsect of racism. So it's like discrimination within, because they're both still black people. So discrimination within the community.
I've heard it's even tougher than between. I've heard a lot more black people were killed by black people that is with softer, lighter skin. For example, if I want to kill, if I'm a slave owner and I want someone to be killed, I'll say another black slave, hey, go and kill him. I'm not gonna do it by myself.
That's, I don't 100% doubt that. I mean, a slave master using someone to do their bidding.
Yep.
But that's what it goes back to. So now, bringing this forward to the Zoe Saldana situation in the Hollywood industry, because of that, especially combining that history with European beauty standards, how people from Europe are the most, are publicized the most attractive or whatever, blonde hair, blue eyes, whatever, white person, they're considered to be the standard of beauty, all that crap. So, as closer to white as you are, you're given more favor in the entertainment industry. You might have more access to roles, or if you're in a movie, the roles you play might be better roles, or you might get better pay, or just those little benefits of things.
All right.
So now, you have Zoe Saldana, a light-skinned black woman. She decided to accept the role of Nina Simone, who's a dark-skinned black woman. So Nina Simone had different experiences as a dark-skinned black woman, and at the same time, the director, the people who control the casting, they did not try to find a dark-skinned black actress out there.
How do you know? Maybe they tried. Maybe they failed.
There's many.
Okay.
Dark-skinned black. Viola Davis, Lupita Nyong'o. So yeah, I said Viola Davis, Lupita Nyong'o. There's Letitia Davis.
Okay.
I can. There's Keke Palmer. I can just go. I can go on.
Okay.
The general principle is there's no excuse. I mean, there's no excuse like, oh, I couldn't find any. There's plenty of talented dark-skinned black actors out there who could have portrayed that role, especially also because they're also dark-skinned. It helps them in their actual role as well, because they can probably visualize and try to simulate, and they can understand those exact experience, perhaps what she's gone through, whatever. Like if they're doing a scene about Nina Simone's life, they can really feel probably how she felt in real life, that when she acted out, because they understand they're in the exact same situation, the exact same person, like the level. They're both dark-skinned black women. So
all right.
That's where it comes down to in the Hollywood industry.
We covered Nina Simone part.
Yeah.
How about the part where the person was white? For example, probably that would be a bad example, but Nick Fury, for example, he was what I'm talking about?
Oh, Nick Fury?
Yeah,
the comic character?
Yeah, and then he was white in comics, but then he was played by Samuel L. Jackson. That's okay, that's comics. But there is, for example, like historical figure like Achilles, in Troy.
Yeah.
He played by Brad Pitt, yeah. But then there was a Netflix TV show, especially Netflix is like this. In Netflix, he was actually African American,
really?
And there is no way he could be an African American, because it's middle of the Europe, it's Hellenism, it's like there is no way he could be African American. And we have a lot of situations where white characters, even historical characters sometimes, are played by African Americans. And what do you think about that? Then you should be as angry about that as you're angry about Nina Simone played by.
There's also characters. There's this movie about a leader of Egypt being played by a white person.
Yeah, I agree.
So yes, there's historical inaccuracy. I don't know exactly what example you're referring to about the Netflix TV show with Achilles. I just never heard of that show.
Yeah, but let's suppose this happened. Yeah,
but
anyway.
in general, of historical inaccuracy,
it's not only about historical. It's also like there is comics. There is white character here, and in the movies he's portrayed as black, for example. Yeah, or like I can bring several examples, but I live in my own culture. Probably you don't know it. Yeah.
Well,
why nobody is angry about that? Of course, you can be angry about this guy who is Egyptian and he's portrayed by a white person. Yeah, you can be as angry with that as but nobody is angry. Everyone is like, okay, he's played by African American. That's okay. Yeah.
Well, What I will say about that, why is there seemed to be a lack of anger? Because, at least in the way I described, that is a very rare instance compared to usually the other way around.
Okay.
And not only is it just like the other way around, not only is it just historical inaccuracy, it's about perpetuating the same discriminatory actions of exclusion and taking away opportunities than it is for a black guy playing a killer. That might be historically inaccurate.
Yeah.
But it's not like this black person's like really damaging or doing any harm to denying white actors from opportunities. When white male actors, I'm sure a white male actor can find plenty of opportunities to get a role in some other particular entertainment project.
Yeah.
Whatever. It can be more of a struggle for a black actor of that same thing. So they go for a role.
So you're saying that they're accepted because of desperate? They're desperate. That's why they accept it, right? You're saying this African American or black.
I don't know why this particular person accepted that role. Kill. That I don't know. I don't know.
But generally.
Yep. Well, I don't even know generally because that's the first time I heard that sort of situation. I mean, when you tell me right now, I've never heard of this situation before. I'm like, all right, like all right. But for example, comics is a little bit different, right? Because comics is literally based.
Scandinavian gods, for example, there is this Thor movie, and Scandinavian gods are playing by African Americans. People who are also
yeah. But
Idris Elba, I think,
Idris Elba was Heimdall and Thor.
Yeah.
But at that point, who cares? Because it's fake mythical stuff. I mean, like, which I was going to say about comics. It's like, Nick Fury when Samuel Jackson played Nick Fury.
Yep.
I don't know if the comic book ever did a change to a black person for Nick Fury in the actual comic. I don't know.
I don't know either.
But even if they never did, at that point it's like it's a comic. I mean, as long as the company, I guess, says it's okay, which I guess they did, then right.
Also, it's Samuel L. Jackson. He's cool everywhere.
It's all your examples were based on fictional. Well, other than Achilles, I know Achilles is a real person, but the comics or Thor, the gods, it's all based on mythical stuff. So at that point, I tend not to care as much, right? Also. And think about it like this. Those two examples you brought up of like black people, Samuel Jackson and Idris Elba, two of the greatest black actors out there. Like when you ask anyone, name 5 great black actors. If they can even name 5, I promise you, in every person's list, Samuel Jackson and Idris Elba will both be mentioned. So you have like 2 of the greatest black actors of all time. They're the ones who are able to walk in and, let's say, turn over and take up a historically inaccurate role in a film. Whether I can name certain situations where a white person who's not nearly as esteemed in their craft, they can take a role, a historically inaccurate role just like that. So you see a lack of dynamics, like you have to be really good. For example, this is an old saying in the black community. You have to work twice as hard to get half as much.
Because you're black?
Well, what it means is because of the struggles of perhaps living in American society, you have to really, what it means is you have to really excel and show yourself of a high standard for people to give you a chance.
Yep.
So that's essentially what it means. Work twice as hard as for half as much.
I got it. Yeah.
So I'm not saying but that applies to Samuel Jackson exactly, but I'm saying like you have guys like, you have to be like Samuel Jackson level to get
simple role, yeah.
Well, not even simple role, but just those type of roles where you can just say they'll give you a role what was traditionally a white person, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever, So it's not like it happens all the time,
Yeah, yeah. But where I was going with that, don't you think Hollywood is kind of distracting from real problem? For example, if African American is growing is in privileged district and he's watching movies and he sees that in every movie there is an African American character, there is this great actress, there is this privilege for Oscar award, and he's like, hey, we're not very punished, I don't see racism here. And the world, white people, like, for example, in Europe, they see it, hey, they're giving black people is free, like they're good, they're okay, because look at how many privileges they have. If we watched any movie, there isn't tolerance there, they give rights. Do you think that this system is trying to distract from real problem by giving this cheap...
I would say if you're looking towards Hollywood, I'm looking at the camera, that's the camera, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking towards Hollywood, of all places, for an example of how a society should be, then you need some evaluation of your own. That's at the end of the day, Oscars and like any of those sort of awards and type things, it's just a bunch of people just saying it's politics. A bunch of people saying, you know what, they judge the craft or whatever or whoever, and they just say, hey, we're gonna give an award to this guy for whatever reason. So, no, don't look towards Hollywood for how things are. You shouldn't be looking towards Hollywood in the first place. It's just a bunch of super rich people, who would never experience, no matter what their color is, they would never experience the same struggles as an average working class person. They are not the arbiter of social justice or how things should be. They are just, they're very high up on the labor aristocracy, and they're very privileged people. So, no, you shouldn't be looking towards them.
That's a good point. Very good point. Yeah.
But not all of them are capitalists. They're just, they're workers. Actors, they are just workers. They're they're paid very well, but they're workers.
Aristocracy is very well
yes,
said.
The people who own the movie production company, those are the capitalists. But that's another thing. But yeah.
Is there a lot of silliness in Black Lives Matter? Is it organized power? Is it really changing the world? Or it's just letting a pressure from black community, What do you think about that?
It can be both. When people see see videos of destruction of monuments.
Yep.
First of all, they're attacking monuments of historical figures who in general really should not be celebrated. Okay. And that's just a fact. In the U.S., we celebrate people who are quite frankly disgusting people, whether it's they owned slaves or committed genocide against indigenous people or committed human rights violations in the medical industry. There's one doctor in New York who, J. Marion Sims or Sam, something like that. He did medical research testing against black women without their consent, such as pain tolerance, the idea that black people are more tolerant of pain, which is false, all that fake science nonsense. But anyways, there's that. So no, I have no issue with that. Absolutely not. And in general, when people say seeing destruction, whatever, I think to myself, since when is property damage held in higher regard than the loss of human life?
But you still could, go to...
If you allow property damage if you allow property damage to allow you from supporting the idea of being against whether it's oppression or the loss of human life, then that's sort of how you always felt, and you were just looking for an excuse. That's just how I see it, frankly. There are a lot of people who feel the way they do about Black Lives Matter. I have my own opinions about them.
Then tell it.
In terms of Black Lives Matter, the movement, not speaking about the organization, because I don't know much about the organization. I don't. But just the movement of Black Lives Matter is a very important one. I don't think they go far enough, though.
Not radical enough, you're saying.
Huh?
Not radical enough, you're saying.
Yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. I don't think they target the important figures and objectives that they should. There's a saying. There's a saying, a protest that everyone agrees with is not a protest. It's a parade. Parades do nothing. Protests. Sometimes protests do not. People have been protesting against black oppression for half a century now. It's like civil rights movement. Let's take civil rights movement for example. That was almost 50 years ago.
Yep.
No, that was over 50 years ago.
Yeah,
that was almost 60 years ago.
Actually.
So, and we're still doing the same stuff. So it was like, in my opinion, they don't go far enough, quite frankly.
Then why don't you go there and radicalize the movement?
Well, I'm not going to say in front of the entire audience in the Eurasian part of the world, in fact, the whole world, what I exactly do.
Okay.
I will say there are things I do and interact with people in my circle that we get out and try to, to advise and, but we're not here, here's the thing, some people have these delusions of grandeur and they want to take over. And that's a part of a larger thing. People wanting to take over movements and lead and blah, blah, blah. I think it's important when people stress they want to lead things, perhaps we should be wary of them in general. For example, if someone says, oh, listen to me, I got a great idea, follow me, blah, 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 you think, why should we follow you? Leadership should be established by everyone else pointing and saying, you lead us. We know your ideas and we know what you're doing. We want to follow you.
Yep.
That's how leadership should be established. If people are yearning for power like that, historically, sometimes it's not good.
But you made a very good point that BLM is not radical enough. They don't go as far as you need to, as people need to.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's because BLM organizers are the same government or system agents as it was in Black Panther. There were a lot of people who were hired by CIA.
Absolutely.
And they were actually having a big influence on the leaders of the movement,
Absolutely.
Especially in the end.
In the Black Panthers, historically, there's a CIA operation called COINTELPRO. And it was about them, essentially in the Black Panther period, they would gather up informants and stuff like that and have people in the movement on the inside working for them, but they are able to, with their informants, they are able to see how things worked, blah, 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 try to go, gather information and to eventually initiate the takedown of the whole organization. Just because COINTELPRO was officially canceled doesn't mean it really stopped.
Okay, but maybe Black Panther is the same movement, but it's already.
I mean, what I'm saying is, there's no reason to think that the CIA, through the Black Lives Matter movement going on, there's no reason to think the CIA is not doing the same thing.
Okay. Then you should think negatively of Black Lives Matter because it's used to let the pressure of the society. Black people are angry, and then the Black Lives Matter coming over and saying, hey, let's go protest. There you go, the protest, you do something, you break a monument or you go even further, but then they say, okay, let's go home. And then you go home and you're like, hey, we had our own right to riot or to rebel, And what do you think about that?
I think we might be confusing slightly between the organization and I'm not saying the organization is taken over by the CIA, and I'm not saying they are. I'm not saying they aren't. I don't know, But I just think it takes people to be. For example, the George Floyd killing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. You notice that there was a point during the protests, they were agitated by the police, and it turned into an insurrection. People called them riots. They weren't riots. It was an insurrection. It was rebellion. Why? Because there was actually a political purpose behind it. It was to the point where that's what I wanted to see more of.
But it doesn't happen.
There was for example, you notice the problem with in the protest, just to get a brief example, really briefly, the reason what made people so angry was at the time there was a lack of arrests of the police officers who killed George Floyd.
Yep.
They weren't arrested. So because of that, it angered people. And you notice it got to the point where, they were protesting, oh, George Floyd, nothing happened. They didn't arrest the officers. But when things start to go up on fire, buildings, like for example, Target, they broke into a Target and they set it on fire.
Yep.
Target, the corporation, the grocery
Yeah,
stores, they're not familiar with it, but Target, the grocery store chain, is based in Minneapolis. They're headquartered in Minneapolis. That's where they're from. You set Target on fire. You set a Wendy's on fire, and then you attack the police station.
Precinct is also on fire.
Yep. Then you noticed they arrested the officers rather quickly once that happened. It got to the point where the state literally acknowledged, we cannot handle these people. The state acknowledged, we can't control them.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, that's how I see protests. That's why they're not radical enough. Protests is actually like, it's actually like war. It's a microcosm of war.
I agree.
Here's the thing. In war, when you have two sides fighting, I'm not gonna go listen to negotiations. If two sides have their own aims, I'm not gonna go, negotiate whatever turns, blah 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 blah. I'm just gonna keep going because I'm winning. But if I'm losing, and it's like we're conflict, and it's like, oh, this is a losing battle, I don't have to control the situation, then I might be more willing, hey, let's come to the negotiating table, let's talk about this, I'm willing to hear your desires. And that's what it's about. When in Minneapolis, when the state literally felt they lost control, they knew what the people wanted anyway, and they made it, and they said, oh, we'll take our time, investigate everything. But when state literally saw to themselves, we can't control this, we lose control, we don't know what to do. So they arrested them. So that's part of my, that's why I said they're not radical enough. If we want serious change, we have to push the envelope. We have to make the authorities, the institution of authority buckle, and then things can happen.
Yeah, but do you think they really should be concentrating on their police brutality, anger? Maybe if BLM would change their demands, their requirements, not abolishing police, not defunding police, but for example, better economy, better education, job guaranteed, removing all this conviction part of our job application. No one can know if person served or not. There is so many things how you could approach this problem, and you African Americans could still live better, And why do someone behind this BLM movement, they have selected false targets in the beginning.
Here's where I disagree. Well, what prevents them from demanding all those things, including defunding or abolishing police? Nothing prevents them from doing that. Then police is a serious problem. It's the biggest gang in America. The police, they have the structure, they have the unions, they have the power to do what they like with very minimal consequence. They have the power of, as they call it, of immunity. So in the courts, in many places, state, citywide, state, federal, they have it's called qualified immunity. If an officer does something which may be considered against the law, if they were reasonably doing it within their duties as a cop, they can declare qualified immunity and not be convicted of a crime for it.
I know it.
So, there's serious, yes, police as it stands right now in the United States is a very serious problem, and it should be abolished. Now, does that mean those other issues can't be ignored? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And they should be out there fighting for that too. And they are. They are.
I don't know. I haven't ever seen any free education for African American science or.
Well, that's when you fight for investing, for example, the NBA of all places, the National Basketball Association, the league, they offered, and when they restarted their play, they offered different like things and directives and things they could put on their jerseys, like social change issues they can fight for, and a really popular one was called education reform. Particularly, one particular player, Kyle Lowry, of the Toronto Raptors, he wore that. But yeah, it's a very popular thing, education. So yeah, the issue is out there and it's being thrown, at least in the those kind of the movement. It's being we want education reform, we want those type of things, but we also want serious change in the police department. At least that's the movement saying that as well, because is an institutional cancer. It's a problem. Yeah,
but I don't know. It will not solve all the problems. Okay, tomorrow all police officers will have only rubber bullets in their guns. They won't be shooting. They won't be killing anyone by their shooting. Tomorrow, for example, all police officers will be elected from people. There will be like militia. The police in this way will be defunded. This will not solve a problem. The root of the problem, the lack of education, economical inequality, the underprivileged districts, they will still exist. They will be still there.
Since when does education reform and other initiatives to try to help underprivileged communities, how's that going to help against police brutality? How's that going to help against the fraternal order of police unions out there who have the power to lobby politicians to give them the same qualified immunity and qualified supports, that allows them to keep doing what they're doing? How does that protect against the idea of civil forfeiture? If you haven't even been convicted of a crime, they can take your stuff.
Yes.
How does that protect against no-knock warrants? How does that protect against red flag laws of gun confiscation?
Well,
go ahead.
No, you can finish. But why there is police brutality? Don't you see that in America, a police officer can approach a person, and this other person, he can be a criminal or he cannot be criminal, but he can have a gun, and when he is going to his pocket, there is a likelihood that there will be a gun in his hand, and police officer working in this underprivileged district, he sees a lot of shit going on, a lot of bad stuff going on, a lot of bad events happening. Probably his comrade or friend is killed by someone of a specific race, and he gets angered. And this, as we Marxists, we should understand why police officers are like that. It's not just because they're enjoying their power, they're not being punished. They're like they have all the powers that you said, but they weren't at least enjoying it in the beginning. They didn't think, hey, I'll be going there, I want to be a police officer so I can kill black people. They're not like that. They are created by their condition. They work in the probably in dangerous district. Then the consciousness is created among police officers. Then they influence other police officers. But if they will see that black people acting the same way as white people, if they see that economical level of black people is the same as white people, they will say they will be the same. They will be treated the same way. So maybe
that's
not the case.
That's not the case at all.
Okay.
In fact, one, who's to say that black people don't act the same as white people? It could be the officer's own bias. Now, just because they don't enjoy anything, I don't care what they enjoy or don't enjoy. Factually, whether they enjoy it or not, I'm not a mind reader. Factually, they still have those benefits because of their job. They have qualified immunity, civil forfeiture. They have all these powers from the state. And whether they enjoy or not, I don't care. They should not have those benefits. That's my point. There's, yes, we should also have reform. I'm the first to say yes, we should have more initiatives that serve those good. But they're not two mutually exclusive. We can't. It's not either or. You know, we should not have being able to people to trample over your rights just on a whim, and then get away with it, essentially, with very little recourse, at least directly towards the police. Those situations, they sue the jurisdiction, the city or the state. They sue the jurisdiction of the whole police force, and they just get a settlement if anything like that. That doesn't do anything for the officer. Officer's just going about his business, going on to the next person. But we have to, at the end of it, we have to reform. You still think of police as how it is where you're from.
Yep.
You do.
Maybe.
You just do.
Okay.
In the U.S., policemen stem from slave patrols. They stem from. That's where they come from. People who went off, their job, they patrolled back in those times, and they looked for slaves that ran away from their master owners, and to grab them and bring them back, or fugitives and stuff like that. That's where they come from. So they came to protect property, or to not let property get away, because slaves were property. That's where it comes about. So as a result, the idea, just in general, police in America are naturally, and I mean literally naturally, racist. I mean, it's just a fact. That's just where they come from. That's just how it is. Because of that, there's also an established, even when chattel slavery ended, and there was sharecropping and targeting of black people in general, because black people also on average are poorer. So if you're poorer, you're less likely to buy really good defense counsel, a good lawyer, or stuff like that. You're easy to convict. You're easy to get a result. And that's another thing, and that's free labor, because and then it keeps the economy going. So it's just, they're part of a larger system. So it's the idea, police as we know in America is rotten, and the idea of police in America must utterly be destroyed and reformed with something else. That's fine, but literally it is just not. We can't expect serious change for the benefit of a lot of things, but we can't expect to have serious change in society until police, as we know, are abolished. That's just only one little thing as a part of it, but it's still important. So
there is a whole layer of society. There are white people. They probably called most likely white trash, and there is whole layer of society, and they live in the same probably condition as poor black people do. They live there in their own underprivileged district. They live in this trailer houses.
Absolutely.
and can they be part of this Black Lives Matter movement?
Anyone can be part of a Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, for example, if one of these person
no one owns a monopoly on the movement. It's just a movement.
I agree, but if, for example, white person will be a leader of this movement, people will be questioning why is that?
Yeah, and as they should. That'd be kind of weird.
Maybe where I'm going with this, maybe this racial problem is distracting from real economical problem, because maybe if it will be named Poor Lives Matter, for example, or underprivileged lives matter, maybe it will be more effective because it will involve more people that have problems.
Well,
also there are black people who are privileged, they are rich, they belong to our aristocracy, so they can go to this Black Lives Matter movement and they can say, hey, my lives matter, I can be your leader, I'm popular among you, so maybe it's
I don't really see that happening much, I guess. Put it this way. I mean, rich black people are still rich and higher class, so you don't really see it. I mean, For example, I mean, you see, like, for example, athletes, but the athletes are just workers. You know, athletes.
But they still post on their Facebook
yeah.
hashtag BLM.
Well, yeah.
Hey,
well,
I
yeah.
support
but,
Black Lives
yeah.
Matter. All
Yeah.
this
For example,
stuff.
athletes, you see all the time with athletes, but at the same time, athletes are just workers. They get paid. They're high, just like actors. They're high in the labor aristocracy, but they're just workers. A lot of them came from poor areas, you know, and they able to have a rich career. That doesn't mean, being rich. Yes, they're absolutely privileged, but they're still black. For example, a rich person can drive, you know, they've driven to mind their own business, or they have an accountant with a police officer. The police officer may not know who they are. They see it as some black person. They maybe not. They don't know if, oh, this is so and so. Maybe he's a basketball player, or he's an actor, or he's a CEO, or he's whatever. You know, your occupation and your income, your financial standing is not printed on your forehead.
But it's on your car. If your car is expensive, it's one thing. If you have a suit that's very expensive on you, that can
Doesn't
be
matter.
also. I don't know.
No, I mean, you don't believe me? Look at former NBA player. He's not former. He still plays. NBA player Sterling Brown, the Milwaukee Bucks basketball team. He was literally brutalized by Milwaukee police. You look it up on YouTube right now. That was a big thing, and they're like, "Oh, that dude plays for the Bucks." And they're like, "Oh crap!" So the police officers like, "Oh crap!" When they found out who he really was, they didn't know who he was back then, or they didn't care to know at least, or whatever. So, and there's all the time these people say, "Oh, this black guy's an expensive car." In fact, for some cops, that's even more of a red flag. Oh, he's an expensive. He must have stolen it. You know. So, woo. You know, at the end of the day, you're a black person. Now, yes, they have privileges, but that doesn't protect them from any of the biases or situations that black people do go through. Does that mean now they need to, hey, look at me, make me your leader of the Black Lives Matter movement or whatever? No, but just like whatever, just like I said before, if someone's really asking to be a leader, you should be wary of that.
But that's what you think.
Huh?
That's your thought, that
Yeah.
if someone is asking to be a leader is a bad thing. Not everyone thinks that, right?
Yeah,
But
not everyone thinks that.
Going back to the topic that about distracting stuff, that Black Lives Matter, maybe it's like it's not saying that there is a problem in capitalistic system. It's saying there is a social problem, and strictly social with black people. But for me, and for some people probably, it's a economical problem. It's a systematic problem for me. And when you abolish this capitalistic system, only then you will solve the problem of racism. And so the movement is going in the wrong direction, you know, like it's concentrating on this racial social problem. What do you think about that? Do you think it's wrong and this racial problem can be solved in the border of the current system?
I also think it is obviously a problem with capitalism, but there's also, I mean, I don't know if you're not paying attention, but there's also anti-capitalist rhetoric used in these some activist circles. Here's
How big is it?
Black Lives Matter, the whole movement, it's not some monolithic thing.
Okay.
I mean, I guess there's an organization out there called Black Lives Matter, but the whole movement itself is not some monolithic thing. In fact, really, a lot of it is just a phrase. You know, well, really, it's just a bunch of people who recognize what's happening with black people in this country, and it's like a rallying cry. Black Lives Matter. Any people can shout Black Lives Matter. Okay, you know, right? What they're saying is, you know, like, they're anti-police. They see police as an issue, and which it is. Are they linking it back to capitalism? It depends. Maybe some are, some aren't. That's where educating people comes in. But to pivot and say that people are focused on the wrong thing, in fact, that's incorrect.
Okay.
Because, you know, regardless of what we think, it's about capitalism, about economics and stuff like that, the fact remains, police brutality is an issue. And by just totally forsaking, ignoring that, is actually not. It's quite irresponsible.
But we can say that this happens because of capitalistic system, and what Black Lives Matter mostly saying, this happens because we have bad police system, you know.
Well, both are true.
It's both are true, but something is a root and other is just one is a reason and the other is consequences,
like
you
a
know?
symptom, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I'll even expand this thought more. Look at our movement, how we protest. Women are protesting for their own rights. They are also handled bad economically. They're not hired on some position. They're either treated badly, and there is a thing called glass
house ceiling.
Yeah, where they glass ceiling. Yeah, where they can grow from the some part. And I'll just flatter myself and say that in Soviet Union this problem was actually solved. There was nowhere in the world the amount of women engineers, women leaders as it was in Soviet Union. So I already think that it's an economical problem for me. But women think that there is a bad bosses, there is some prejudice in society, but not the problem is not a capitalistic system. That's what women who is protesting are thinking mostly. And the same about I don't know, Chinese who is now seeing anti-Chinese mood in the country, right? Or anti-Muslim mood that was like 20 years ago when you were wearing all this stuff and you were coming over to the store and people can just don't serve you because you're a Muslim, right? Also, of course, it happens with 0.01% of people maybe, but it still happens, you know, and there is still this mood in the society. And each of this group are fighting by their own. Black people is fighting for Black Lives Matter, women is fighting in Me Too, some ethnicities fighting for their own rights. For example, Kazakh people are fighting with Borat, yeah, and this is why we're weak, we're separated. Don't you agree with that? Don't you see that? We should create Poor Lives Matter as just made up 5 minutes ago. Some revolutionary organization that unites everyone who is underprivileged, not just Black Lives Matter. Don't you see that?
Fun fact, Martin Luther King in 1968, well, after the Civil Rights Act was passed, he focused on capitalism.
Yeah, I know that, yeah. I've read a couple
in
of
1968, when he was assassinated, he planned on actually doing a poor people's movement, and he was actually in Memphis when he died because he was supporting a strike in the city. So, yes, I think speaking about capitalism is obviously the root, but the problem is you speak dismissing the issues. For example, I'll give an example like this. If you have the flu, you know, the flu it's a virus, but it has certain symptoms. Doesn't mean you're not going to treat the symptoms, you know, where you treat the symptoms, and then you also, you know, you take your shots or whatever to that's, you know, that goes back to also you address things like was it police brutality or was it rights for women or certain or for any you address and you answer for any forms of oppression, and also there's movements for that too. Not every specific movement has to address everything, because there are movements out there for everything. Well, almost.
I'll give you actually. I'll continue your analogy actually. For example, I work in some place where it's constantly cold.
Okay.
It's always cold. There is windy going on, you know, like wind is going on through the whole building, you know, and I'm constantly getting my sore throat, you know, like for example, and my nose is leaking and I'm coughing constantly. But when I come home, I go to doctor and I'll treat myself as much as I can. Of course, I heal from some time, but then it doesn't work, you know, because I work in these conditions and I do nothing for changing these conditions, but I'm constantly treating the symptoms. This is how it looks now. And if I will concentrate my attention on changing the work instead of constantly treating myself and keep going to this work, maybe the life will change, for me. Maybe I'll have a nice job. That's how it looks for me. What do you think about that? Do you disagree? Or do you think the movement, BLM are working on both conditions?
Changing the temperature in an office building is not exactly a form of oppression.
That's just analogy.
I understand it's analogy, but because of that, because your analogy, it's based on an inconvenience.
Yep.
An inconvenience and oppression are inherently different, and they're inherently treated differently, as they should be, as a result. Because one is obviously is an inconvenience, the other one is actually, it's about human life and human existence and human dignity. So, as a result, there should be focus and attention on all of it, and it's possible. It's not like tunnel vision is necessary. You can be involved in multiple different. One movement does not have to fit everything. But also,
the problem is there is no such movement, anti-capitalistic movement. That's a problem.
Well, again,
it's very small.
That's something that can be educated and informed. It's not like we have to co-opt, hey, Black Lives Matter, how about we adopt an entire anti-capitalist movement? Or people, you educate people, and then we organize them to have a movement about an anti-capitalist movement. But if we don't have to take over, so to speak, it's like we don't need to. There's not like just one movement, and if we need to talk about an issue, we need to take over this movement to talk about it. And so it's just like everyone can. There's space for everything.
All right. Talking about, let's start wrapping it up. Maybe you can. Here was a part who can be watched by anyone. But this last part, I want to talk more about socialism, just briefly. How did you come to anti-capitalism, to socialism? How did you become socialist, communist, Where did it come from? It's very unusual for American to be a communist for me, because there is so much mythology. There is history books that are saying all false, And there was no great superpower that you lived in before that you can admire, like in Soviet Russia or Soviet Kazakhstan, So how did you become communist?
Well, I have family back, I have some relatives who were Black Panthers.
Okay.
So,
did they make you read books, or you were just watching their example? How did it exactly happen?
No, but they did have a couple of, they had some literature from popular figures that I eventually read growing up. So,
can you give a couple of examples of this literature?
Oh,
People is Rising?
Yeah. Huey Newton, Revolutionary Suicide.
Yep.
Really good one. Then you had like dissertations from people like Angela Davis, Assata Shakur, other Black revolutionaries around. I was reading. I remember growing up reading about the George Jackson Brigade and Franz Fanon.
Yeah.
So, just other Black strong revolutionaries. Reading about the life Fred Hampton, reading about that. So, again, by the time I was growing up, the Black Panthers were long and gone. So, my relatives who were in it, that was like 30 years before I was born. Well, no, about 25 years before I was born. To them, it was just a time of their life that they were involved in it. I didn't really talk to them much about it.
Okay.
I really never did. So I just came to my own confusion. It's just because they just happen to have some literature.
Okay. Actually, I think Angela Davis is kind of in Democratic Party now or something like that. Do you know that part? She's like, she said some weird stuff, you know.
I don't know.
Like
But I mean,
she's
like,
not a communist anymore. She's like,
no, she's very much still
really?
anti-capitalist. Yes.
Okay.
I will
Maybe
not
read
accept.
wrong.
I will not accept slander on Angela Davis.
Okay. I just read some news. I remember. I'll probably refer it to you. Maybe you can explain me that.
Yeah,
I don't
maybe-
remember that now.
Maybe we can talk. But she's certainly, she's certainly done great work, and for inspiring the Black
Is
community.
she in BLM now?
Huh?
Is she in Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, yeah. I mean, the movement's not like, oh, here's your Black Lives Movement membership card. You know, it's not
No,
like.
but there's still participation, going there,
I-
giving speeches,
I thi-
saying that you support it. You know.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
That's, you know, this doesn't take much to say. Yeah, I support. I'm in the movement. I mean, so I don't go checking how, you know, oh, they're in the movement. Are you really in the movement? You know, I don't know. You know, it's not something I really follow.
Yep.
So
Yep. All right. Tell us some farewell words. What do you think? What do you want to say to our viewers? What's your farewell? There's a camera.
if you stayed up this whole time listening to what I said, thank you. You know, you probably understood only half of what I said, and that's fine. You can watch it again, but no, I enjoyed it. Max is a friend of mine, and due to the pandemic going on, we haven't interacted too much. But so no. So yeah, it's cool to hang out with you and gentleman on the camera. And, no,
Okay.
it's been fun. So
Nice seeing you.
yeah, nice seeing you.